Hello, everyone. Welcome to Doing Sociology. Today, we have with us Professor Debal SinghaRoy. He is a professor of sociology in Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi. He is a recipient of the Australian Government Endeavour Fellowship 2010 at the University of Technology, Sydney, Australia, and the Commonwealth Fellowship at the Open University, the United Kingdom, 2006 to 7. Furthermore, he has been a fellow with the Alternative Development Studies Program, Netherlands, 2003, a visiting research fellow at the University of Alberta, Canada, 2001, and a visiting scholar at the La Maison des Sciences d'Olm, Paris, 1999 and 2007. His books include Peasants' Movements in Post-colonial India, published by Sage in 2004, the Wiley-Blackwell Encyclopedia of Social and Political Movement, Blackwell Publishing Limited in 2013, and Towards a Knowledge Society, New Identities in Emerging India, Cambridge University Press, 2014. Sir, I welcome you with all my gratitude to our blog and hope, we have a productive conversation.
Thank you. Yeah.
So let me begin by asking you about the category of peasants in the Indian context, because you've worked on it and we have seen that it has undergone a lot of academic debate. And why is this, happening? Also, what would be some of the major approaches towards the same? And what is the conceptual framework that you propose to understand this category?
Yeah, thank you. It's a very broad and in-depth question. Let us begin with, we have to recognize that peasants are a distinctive social category, and they have been conceptualized diversely in terms of the time and space consideration by the anthropologists, sociologists, and social scientists in general. And in general, they have been described to be the largest segment of humanity, remained attached to land and agriculture for the production of the foods and related services, remained economically marginalized, socially and culturally subjugated, and also occupying politically underdog position in the society. Simultaneously, they have been conceptualized to have the potential for collective social protest and resistance against the others. But the peasants also were to recognize that they are a very complex, internally differentiated and stratified social category. And often they are intersected with varieties of other social categories like those of the cultivators, the farmers, the laborers, the migrants, artisans, and many other rural working population. Further, the occupational diversification as we are experiencing in contemporary society, that occupational diversification, technological innovation, demographic transition, environmental degradation, penetration of the market economy, contemporary economic neoliberalism, ICTs and postmodernity, populism, resurgence of cultural politics have widely impacted the entity of the peasants in the contemporary world. Hence, what is required to conceptualize the peasants as a social category and to put them in a perspective, along with a historical and comparative perspective, the dimensions of contemporary relevance are required to put in place so that we can have a comprehensive understanding of the peasant as a social category. By saying so, we have to accept this fact. In the social science literature, they have been subjected to paradoxical description. On the one hand, they have been described to be the reactionary, conservative, awkward class, homologous, incomplete, dependent, and the part society. Simultaneously, they have also been described as a revolutionary, progressive, self-conscious, heterogeneous, self-sufficient, and having the potential for collective actions. So what we find that there has been a diverse perspective to conceptualize the peasants in terms of their relationship with the wider society. Now, when you are talking about the relationship with the wider society, it has been visualized again in terms of their relationship in the cultural dynamics, in the political dynamics, in the economic dynamics. Let us briefly talk about how their relationship with the wider society in cultural terms is visualized by famous anthropologists like Robert Redfield and Kroeber. But Robert Redfield pointed out that in the wider social framework, peasants have always been the part of a larger society. However, Robert Redfield has viewed them from their specific cultural way of life as their very unsystematic, non-concrete tradition of many unreflective, unsophisticated, non-literati constituting the mosaic of little tradition of the society. So when you put the society within the dichotomous projection of a little tradition and great tradition, he underlines that peasants one way or the other belong to the little tradition of the society. In the same way, I mean, when Kroeber talked about the peasant society, he talks about peasants are the part of the a bigger whole of the society, but they are only part of a part society and part culture. So they have looked them in terms of part society, part culture, and part of a larger society. But there are also some internal dynamics of the peasant society. It is widely talked about by some of the scholars like Shanin. He talks about, there are some internal dynamics. So we have to look at them from a holistic perspective. He underlines that peasant farmer that is founded on that an economy. Peasants are founded on family farms, and the family farms are the basic unit, but it is having a multi-dimensional social function. Social function means in terms cultural function, economic function, also political function, and land husbandry as the main means of their livelihood, and a specific cultural way that determines their way of life as a part of a small community or a little community. And simultaneously, Shanin also talks about they occupy an underdog position in a society and dominated by the outsider. In a whole, what he underlines again that they occupy a marginalized position in the society as the hardcore of their characteristics. So these are some of the internal dynamics of the peasant society. Now it goes, as I pointed out, that the first part, that is peasants are the people, those who are dependent on land and they produce based on the land. But for whom do they produce? I mean, that is one of the way to look into, how the peasants are linked to the wider society. Because when you are talking about the wider society, society is stratified, society is segregated, it's linked to the market, linked to the wider politics. Again, I'm coming back to Redfield. Redfield is widely underlining that may be the core point of identifying the peasants even in the contemporary world, that is in a stratified society, based on the scale of operation, orientation to the market, and patterns of landholding and labor utilization. Redfield calls them, they are the small producers and they produce for their own consumption. In the same line, Chianov widely talked about they produce to suffice the need only of the family rather than the market to make profit. They are dependent on the labor from their own family. And what he's also talking about the Chianov, that there is absence of wage labor, profit motive, and interest making, and develop capital out of the production in agriculture. So what he's again underlining, it's a unique kind of a formation, different from slavery, different from feudalism, different from capitalism. It's a totally a kind of a peasant-driven economy that is totally dependent on, rather motive is to suffice the family need. I mean, Eric Wolf also talked about that is peasants are the subsistence producer who produce only for their own consumption, occupy the bottom of the social hierarchy and marginalized position, and lack knowledge to be organized for a collective action. So he's adding something more political dimension to it. For him, peasant work more open than alone in their own land. So it is totally dependent on the family labor. And the burden of the manual work is fall on him because he can't hire the labor, he's dependent on him. And they control the small piece of land that enable him, it is a small piece of land they're engaged in, so unable to withdraw from their subsistence production. Simultaneously, that is extended family and the kinship structure on which they're dependent that keep them rooted in the society against any dislocation. So, and simultaneously, you're talking that a peasant society cross the boundaries of class alliances. So there is a possibility of developing alliances with the other classes. But again, simultaneously talked about as the peasants are excluded from the decision-making process, they are deprived of the knowledge to participate in the collective action. So crux of the point is that peasants are looked into as a small producer, producing to suffice the family need. There is no motive to have profit out of it, and they are dependent on the kinship, other kind of alliances, and their participation in the political process is quite weak because they are not part of the wider decision-making process in the society. This is widely talked about by the sociologists and social anthropologists. Now, I'm coming in the European context. Now it is widely talked about Karl Marx and Kautsky. Karl Marx has underlined the backwardness of the peasantry. And by making a historical analysis of the primitive accumulation, he underlined the decline of the serfdom on the one hand and emergence of the free peasantry in Europe starting from the 14th and 15th century. He, however, underlined gradually peasantry is getting society in the wake of emergence of the new economic and political forces thereafter. And what he finds, peasantry, despite all this development, peasantry, however, turns up again and again society, but in diminishing number, but in progressively in a worse situation. That is what he's talking about. That is peasantry, despite being part of the wider society, gradually their number is declining and they're facing a worse situation, worse economic situation in the society. And while he was talking about the French peasantry, based on his analysis during the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, he highlighted what kind of isolation the peasants are having in the society. And this is widely talked about in the Marxian literature. That is, their modes of production isolates them from one another. A small holding, a peasant and his family, alongside them, another holding, another peasant and another family. A few make up a village, a score of the village make them a department. And in this way, the great mass of the French nation is formed by simple addition of homologous magnitude as such sack of potatoes in a sack form, a sack of potatoes. So what is talking about a homologous character, isolated, but only confined within the family and family to link to another family, and it is widely taken consideration. And in that way, in the conventional and classical Marxian term, they talked about the potential of stratification in the peasant society is minimal, rather absent. But the Marxian formulation of the non-class entity was modified in the context of Russia and China. Lenin has widely underlined the differentiated character of the peasantry in the 19th and 20th century Russia, not only in terms of unequal position of the land and income, but also their contact with the market. And he has found varied degree of revolutionary potential of the peasants. And what he worked about, Lenin talked about, he categorized the peasantry in terms of landlord, capitalist on the one hand, and the working peasants on the other. So what is talking about working peasants, they are working for themselves, but the others, the landlords and the capitalists, they're the profiteers. So we find that is a formulation given by Lenin. But Karl Kautsky, after the revolution of Russia, he highlighted the dissolution of the self-sufficient peasant household in the wake of penetration of the urban capitalism, destruction of the peasant household and handicraft, increasing rural-urban divide, and indebtedness and landlessness of the peasant holding to large-scale migration of the peasant from agriculture to non-agricultural sector. And similarly, in the same way, we find that Shanin has also taken into consideration the life of the peasantry in the post-Russian revolution. Shanin highlighted the characteristics of the peasantry of 19th and early 20th century Russia. And in his famous work, The Awkward Class, he points out that their economic and social life consisted of blood relatives of 2 or more generations who are integrated with the need-based farming, which are not altered even by the Great Russian Revolution. To him, small size, dependent on traditional technologies, low rate of surplus production, lack of specialization, lack of capitalist expansion characterize the agriculture of post-revolution Russia. So what we find that is dependency of the peasant on the land has remained. However, there has not been involvement for the production of the surplus in the society, and there is lack of specialization and also lack of capitalist expansion from that side. Now let us come to the Algeria. It is widely talked about how the peasants of Algeria are looked into by a scholar like Fanon. He talks about in the context of the colonial countries, especially from Algeria. He finds that peasants have played a very revolutionary role, and because of their neglect, of their marginalization of the society, they are posited to a situation where they are having nothing to lose and everything to gain through participation in the collective protest. So he underlines the importance of peasantry in the revolutionary activities. Gramsci, on the other hand, he talks about the peasant in the context of Italy, and he points out that peasants are part of the larger socio-political order and not a discrete identity, rather a vital factor in the ideas and action of the subaltern classes. To him, peasants are divided among themselves as landowners, tenants, and laborers. There is a lack of unity and collective consciousness among them. This allows the ruling classes to maintain their effective hegemonic position through the consent of the peasant without any coercion. To him, peasants participate in their own subordination by subscribing to the hegemonic values. Gramsci, however, accepted the spontaneity and the presence of popular culture of the peasants to be the crucial positive attitude. And he talks about the subordination of the peasantry and their acceptance of the hegemonic position can be broken in their alliance with the urban working classes. So what we find, the possibility of taking part in the collective action is quite explicit in the writing of Gramsci and also Fanon. Also, we find those kind of a thing comes also in the writing of other scholars, will come little later. Now, when we're talking, now let us come how the peasants within the whole context of conceptualization as given by Western scholars, what is the agrarian situation and the peasant society and the peasant community in India? We have to know, as I told, a little bit of historicity of the peasant community in India is widely required. That is, traditional agrarian India was founded on a village community system based on the possession of the common village land. That was what traditionally it was widely talked about. A self-sufficient village community system of production was a part of Indian society. It has been challenged by many authors, but that has also been widely accepted and talked about. Now, in that system, lands are owned by the kings, the emperor, local chieftains in the name of the state, and donated by them to the socially superior caste and categories, military men, kingsmen of the royal family. And in the whole process, the feudal patron-client relationship prevailed with the superior rights of few people on the land vis-a-vis those who cultivated the land. So these are the traditional system it continued. But the Britisher introduced through the permanent settlement in 1793, the Jomindari system, the Mahalwari system, and the Rayatari system. And through this system, they introduced the intermediaries in the society. And when they introduced the intermediary system, we find the self-sufficient village community system collapsed because there emerged layers of landowners and intermediaries in the name of Jamindars, Patanidars, Ijaradars, and varieties of intermediaries in various parts of the country. And those intermediaries also got a lot of help from the market capital. In the process, there was the penetration of the market capital in the agrarian economy, and land started passing on in the hand of varieties of absentee landowners. And what we find, that is, there are three things was going on. Emergence of intermediaries on the one hand. Second, that lot of indebtedness on the part of the small cultivators. The small cultivators, when they're unable to give the rent back to the landowners, the landowners are giving their land, confiscating their land, and they're settling the same cultivators on the same piece of land on the condition that they will produce half of the produce to the landowner as a rent. And those who are not settled, they become the agricultural laborer. Those who are settled, they become the sharecroppers, what we call the bataidars and the bargadars in Bengal. So gradually a society where there was a self-sufficient village community system of production, we find that there emerged a stratified society with the intermediary class on the one hand, tenants, sharecropper, agricultural laborers on the other, and we find those who are the village artisan, many of them also gradually joined the army of agricultural laborers, because unable to withstand the challenges as they encountered with the inflow of the foreign goods in Indian countryside. This description is widely available in the writings of Ramkrishna Mukherjee, R.P. Dutt. They have documented the majorities of the peasantry in Indian society. What we find, the emergence of the tenant and sharecroppers, laborers, and the intermediary landowners, they become quite explicit, and there's a decline of the owner cultivators. The landowning classes, we find gradually they own the several rights and entitlement, but the landless laborers, sharecroppers, and the small cultivators have very little choice. They also underwent varieties of feudal dominance that emerged in the society and that got legitimized, varieties of customary practices founded on the caste and religious endorsement. But the subordinate position got wide political attention in India, and we find that is in Indian context, the Indian movement, our national movement, attracted the attention of our great leaders like Mahatma Gandhi. He took the cause of the peasant in Champaran. Bardoloi movement was spearheaded by Sardar Patel. We find the later part of the 20th century, the Tebaga movement took place, the Telangana movement took place. So peasantry's assertion in collective mobilization has been part of Indian society. Even the nationalist leader, they have taken the cause of the peasants, their plights, their subjugation, their neglect and marginalization of in the society was quite upheld by the national leader. And post-independent India saw a different kind of transformation, and those transformation was widely reflected in the land reform, so that an egalitarian society can be established, especially in the agrarian society. So land reform was introduced that abolished the intermediaries, talked about the tenurial security of the tenants, land consolidation. It's also talked about distribution of the surplus vested land among the poor. That continued till 1960s, and also the land reform laws were radicalized several times, starting from 1950s, 60s, 70s, and thereafter. 60s, later 60s, and early 70s, we find the penetration of the Green Revolution and the Rural Development Initiative, and gradually we find that is the exercise of the adult franchise and citizenship rights started playing a big role in organizing the peasantry and asserting their rights in the society. And also India experienced the radical peasant movement in 60s and 70s. And then in 70s onward, India also seen the proliferation of the farmers movement, the emergence of the rich farmers in the northern part of the country, especially in the agriculturally developed part of the country. So in general, India now experiences the fragmented landholding, decline of the landman ratio, declining category of the cultivators, increase of agricultural laborer, and also marginal workers those who don't get sufficient work in rural society, the phenomenal increase of the marginal workers in the rural setup. So conventionally, these categories of the agrarian society in India is widely viewed in terms of some categorical specification, that is Malik, Kishan, and Mozdur in Indian society. So what we find in general, if we were to look into within this whole stratified society, the transition of the society from self-sufficient village community to a intermediary-based economy, then we find a land reform and also agrarian reform, and green revolution, emergence of varieties of categories. Now, within that, we have to identify who are the peasant and who are the, rather than the peasants, we can talk about. In general, we have to underline that peasants are attached to land either as the small cultivators. As small cultivators, we are having Kishan, Krishak, Rayutu, Chashi. These are the people. They are the small cultivators, the sharecroppers, agricultural laborers, the poor peasant, migrant laborer, predominantly remain engaged in land to eke out their everyday earning. So these are the categories of the people. They can be considered as a peasant. So what I like to conceptualize in one sentence, peasants are the product of historical process of downward mobility in the society, are economically marginalized, socially and culturally subordinated, politically disempowered, and are attached to land as small cultivator, sharecroppers, agricultural laborers, poor artisans, and migrant laborer to take out their livelihood in everyday basis. In this wider society, they are also integrated and respond to the several ways in various forces of the society, like economic neoliberalism, social fragmentation of postmodernity, populism, and also resurgence of cultural politics in contemporary India. This precisely we can talk about the emergence of a peasant as against the other categories in the society.
Right. So you've also talked about women peasants in the country and their participation in peasant movements. So, coming to the very recent farmers movement, we have also witnessed a large participation of women. But there have been also arguments being made against women participating in these protests. So do you think that there has been a change in how women peasants or farmers over the years have existed, or is there still gender blindness? And do you think this change has been reflected in social movements in rural India or other grassroots mobilization? If you could briefly sort of throw some light on this.
Yeah. See, the woman's position in the society is widely conditioned by culturally defined role performances and the role expectation. And this ultimately contributes to the gender role stereotype that impose several constraints on and the barriers to women's liberty and empowerment in the society. Within this institutional arrangement, women do need an extra space for their assertion of their liberty in the society. Their social movement and collective participation provided those required space to break those barriers, and which we have already underlined during the phases of Tevaga movement and the Telangana movement. Women has been able to get that space and created that space for the assertion of their rights in the society. Besides participation in this organized collective mobilization, what we find starting from early 80s onward, the 72 and 73rd Amendment to the Indian Constitution indeed have been the watershed in women's participation in the collective mobilization, because it has institutionalized women's participation in the local self-governance. And many places they are occupying the places of leadership position in the society, and they're questioning the whole structure of domination in the society. As a fallout of that, you have seen that anti-Arab movement in Andhra Pradesh, the Chipko movement in Garhwal. These are spearheaded by women, and gradually they have created their space for assertion in the society. Specific to the farmers movement, this time we have seen a large-scale participation of women in this society. and in this agitation. And it is important that there has been a visible participation, not that from the backyard of the household, but they're coming a visible participation in the public domain. In most agricultural community, we understand men and women experience the common oppression and with a common struggle against such oppression. And the process has now begun. We have to understand, even in northern India, process has now begun for visible collective participation. And it is in the process and for the articulation of new aspiration and occupy a place of leadership. I'm sure that time will come, gradually they will create that space for their collective assertion in the society, to break the barriers of gender segregation, which is now order of the day. I mean, gradually it is being questioned, and it is in the process of getting demolished.
So again, relate, on the question of social movements, how are collective identities formed through social movements? If you could talk a little bit about that, and what are the ways in which collective peasant identities are formulated in the present times?
Yeah, identity, I have written a lot about this identity in my last book. It is, identity will have to accept that identity is a change and transformative agency in the society. It is a structured entity. It reflects not the structure, but also the change agency which is involved within that structure. So it is not simply, when you talk about identity, it is not the status we are talking about. We are talking the meaning attached to it. So it is a part of self-awareness about an entity, meaning attached to it, and it is in the process of initiating varieties of collective action. So rather than as a dynamics and a complex sociality, a reality, we find that identities are in essence undergoes a process of construction, transformation, reconfiguration, and also we find it gets solidified in one context and gets the process of fuzziness and fluidity on the other. So identity is a very complex kind of a thing. It goes various process of reformulation. And when it goes this process of reformulation, we'll have to understand that it's not that static as you talk about. It is a dynamic process. So when we talk about this dynamic process, attaches meaning to it, there is a process of self-discovery, and it also questions through that self-discovery various kind of anomalies, inconsistencies, and subordination goes in developing a persona or a collective identity. As I talked about, in the context of social movement, peasant movement, women were in a position to rejuvenate their identity as a collective self that have not, in a normal state of affairs, they have not questioned the institution of patriarchy. They have not questioned the gender role stereotyping. They have not questioned the subordination that goes in the name of patriarchy, also caste domination or class domination in the society. So those kind of rejuvenation and also rediscovery start taking place through social movement. As Presidano widely talked about, direct participation in the collective action is an essential component, and it's a connecting a process of formation for collective identity. That is, it transforms in Marxian sense a class in itself to class for itself. Rather, what Sartre talked about, it transformed that Seri into group infusion. Seri means an isolated individual. They are not bothered about each other except for technical reason. But a group infusion, they are a self-conscious entity goes for collective action. What happened? That is, when these identities are formed, the group does not remain as an entity itself. They become a part of wider transformation in the society. So that thing we have widely found in case of participation of the peasant in our national movement, participation the peasant in the Champaran movement, Bardole movement, in the Tebaga movement, in the Telangana movement, and varieties of the movement taken place in the society. Even how it has opened up the possibility of women's leadership or a peasant leadership in the society that was quite explicit in the what we call the Chipko movement. And how this identity was created through the anti-Iraq movement. It is the women; those were the isolated categories. But when they came through this, adult education center, when they came together and they organized themselves against the preparation of the Iraq that was destroying the family, and gradually anti-Iraq movement took place, created a new kind of a self and identity in the society. So it is a collective rejuvenation of an identity in the society. But what remains that those identities usually get formulated at one end in terms of certain entities and interest, but also there is a possibility getting fragmented at another end in terms of so many localized formulations. Take into consideration when I'm talking about the peasant identity, peasant as a categories, they are solidified at one end. Simultaneously, there is a possibility of those peasants maybe getting regrouped in the name of caste identity, religious identity, gender identity, and varieties of other forms. It is the Telangana movement that gave birth to the Telangana, language-based a cultural entity. It is the same kind of a Tebaga movement that also gave birth to the Rajbangshi identity, and the Rajbangshi identity also simultaneously got linked to the Tebaga identity. So it is a process of cross-cutting varieties of identities getting intersected in terms of certain immediate emotional expression on the one hand, simultaneously fulfilling immediate need on the other.
So as a scholar who has worked on various social movements in India at different points in time, again, going back to the recent farmers movement, do you think it is different in any way from the other social movements? Because the recent protests have been directed not against traditional landlords, but state policies and legislations and corporate forces. So does this mean there is a union between Maliks, Kisan and Mazdoor, despite the caste and class differences?
You see, this is usually we're talking about the farmers movement. Farmers are usually in the conventional terms in the northern part of India, it is widely talked about in terms of what we call Bada Kisan. Bada Kisan, the Malik usually talk about the movement. And this movement, what we recently experienced in Delhi periphery, and also Haryana, Punjab, and also Western UP, we experience. It's also being a historical route. It is not that all of a sudden it has emerged. The Bharatiya Kisan Union, usually it was a Jamidar association in Punjab, got linked with the Indian Kisan Union gradually, and Bharatiya Kisan Union. They started working from the late 1970s, and they are widely looking for fulfilling the aspiration of the newly emerged progressive farmers, those who have invested in the land for the making profit by engaging themselves in the land, and also further accumulation of wealth and generating of capacity of giving employment in agriculture. So here is a phenomenon that is widely conditioned by the issues and interest of the farmers. So what are that demand has been in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and also in early 2000, when it was quite active in the late 70s and early 1980s. They talked about in terms of abolition of agricultural tariff. They talked about electricity, free electricity. They talked about subsidy in fertilizer. They talked about free tractor repairs, minimum price of the agricultural produce, which is one of the contentious issues. They also started to talk about the same thing from 1970s. So what we find that is the big farmers have articulated their issues starting from late 70s, and here is again those things is getting concretized over a period of time. And it was not only a phenomenon of northern part of the country. We have also found similar kind of farmers movement have taken place in Maharashtra, in Karnataka, also in Tamil Nadu. But this time it is widely focused in northern part of the country, and they have taken the leadership and raising question about these 3 farm laws, as you talked about. What we find that in the whole process, those who are the big producers, they have come to the forefront, and they are in a position to take along with them the other categories like this, even the tenants with them, and other Muslims with them. How they have been able to take that one? Because Punjab and Western UP is having a higher amount of landman ratio than the rest part of the country. That is number 1. And number 2, land is quite fertile. And number 3, the investment in agriculture, especially the tractors, the commercial fertilizers, the high-yielding variety seeds, what we call the biochemical innovation and technological innovation, has been quite explicit and quite to a high order. In this context, these farmers are in a position to mobilize a larger number of the people along with them, so that they can suffice their own need and fulfill their own kind of a need. So it's not a one-time phenomenon. It is having a historicity, and it is a part of the rich farmers' agitation. Obviously, it is against the state. Now, in terms of identifying, what kind of, because earlier movement usually directed against the peasant movement directed against the big landowners, but here they are directing against the state, because states make some policy, that policies need to be altered. So they are the progressive farmer. They are in a position to organize themselves, to pressurize the state through collective mobilization, so that their aspiration is fulfilled and their economic interests are fulfilled in alliance with other categories of the society, in terms of those who are engaged with the production of land in various categories. They're in a position to develop alliances with them. And simultaneously, those alliances are not only in terms of economic categorization, there has also been alliances in terms of social categorization. That is quite important. So what is important at this stage, not only fulfilling economic interest in terms of an agitation, but also developing alliances, interstate alliances with the other social categories, so that their economic interests are fulfilled, but pressurizing the state, following various collective mobilization strategies.
Right. So thank you so much for that elaborate answer. I would also want to know from you that, do you think that there exists state-wise differentials in how agrarian relations are formed in India? And does this difference in size of holdings lead to varying modes of agricultural production?
Yeah, obviously, some very special kind of a thing we can look into. If we compare 2 extreme cases, the Punjab and West Bengal, 2 different cases. As I told earlier, Punjab is having a very high amount of average landholding. In Punjab, the average landholding is more than per household landholding, not individual, per household landholding is to the extent of 0.53 hectare, which is more than the national average of 0.51 hectare. While in West Bengal, it is only 0.17 hectare. So landman ratio is quite weak in Bengal, but it is quite favorable in Punjab. Now, if you look into consideration in terms of landless people, in Bengal, the percentage of the people, those who are not having land is 11.6%. In Punjab, it is 4.6%. So we are having, in terms of uh, control over the land, which is the core of the agrarian economy, those are differently posited. These societies are differently posited, number one. And number two is that they're having a different history of peasant mobilization in both the states, both in Punjab and in West Bengal. Punjab is having a good emergence of enterprising farmers starting from late 1960s onward, those who are in a position to take the green revolution, and the fertility of the land has increased and production in the land has increased, and the agrarian relationship has taken place at a different level. While in West Bengal, that green revolution, I will not say it is missed, but the quantum of green revolution has been quite low because land-man ratio is quite low. And there has been successful in terms of implementation of the land reform laws, because in Bengal, number of the people having more than a defined land amount, that is, no, as per the Land Ceiling Act, nobody can have land more than 7 hectares. In Bengal, a number of the people having land more than 7 hectares is nil. While you will find in Punjab, people having land more than 7 hectares, they constitute more than 4% of the agrarian population, and they occupy more than roughly around 20% of the land. So that inequality has been in a position to have different kind of agrarian relation in both the countries, in both the states. And third important component to what you look into in terms of people's initiative. Panchayati Raj institution has been one of the instruments through which there has been regular mobilization of the people towards the implementation of the land reform laws that is unique to the West Bengal, that has not been part of other parts of the country. But that has also vitiated, one way or the other, the traditional social cohesion that existed in the agrarian society previously, before 1977. Because it was the 1977 onward, the what you call the Operation Varga put in place in West Bengal. So that is vitiated in the agrarian scenario, but that has not been able to ensure the livelihood security, a largest segment of the population. So we find that a different kind of agrarian scene in West Bengal and in Punjab. So when this farmer agitation took place, a good number of the farmers also went to Bengal to mobilize the big farmers of Bengal. But unfortunately, the number of the big farmers of Bengal is conspicuously very few and far between. So that has not been very successful. So we find both the states has gone to different direction in terms of agrarian agitation, also agrarian social relationship. But one part is quite important, is that produce from the agriculture has increased substantially in both the states, both in Punjab and in West Bengal. But in terms of distribution, because of this declining land-man ratio, that inequality remained quite obvious between these two states. So this can also be compared with Karnataka. Also, it can compared with other parts of the country. Yes.
Sir, so finally, since you've talked about West Bengal, we'd like to know from you, because West Bengal has been a state which has seen some of the major land reforms in the country. So how far were the land reforms, which were namely the Operation Varga, successful in empowering the peasants as well as transforming the tenancy relations in the state of West Bengal?
Yeah, you see, Operation Varga in West Bengal was a watershed in the history of land reform movement in the country. And because West Bengal Land Reform, first West Bengal Land Reform Act was passed in 1954, then in 1956, and it was implemented. Unfortunately, it was not implemented in real letter and spirit. Because it was the big landowners, as in any parts of the country, they are in a position to keep the land reform laws in the law book only. So somehow in alliance with the government official and many others, those were not implemented. And but what happened starting from 1960s onward, there was a resurgence of the agrarian movement under the aegis of the left political parties. And that gave birth to this Naxalite movement. That is, they started forcefully occupying the land and distributing among the rural poor. That was one of the demand of the rural people. That is, the surplus vested land should be distributed. When in 1971, the land reform laws again was radicalized, where initially it was talked about 1956 Act, that is, nobody can have land more than 25 acre, that is, it's stock acre, but later it is brought down to 17 acres, and that was 1971 Act. And when the communists came into power in 1977, they made it sure that is all surplus vested land are distributed. So those were distributed. That was one quite unique. Second part is that tenant, those who occupied in Bengal more than 32% of the household in 1954, their percentage reduced to 12% of the rural household by 1971, 72, according to the NSSO document. So eviction of the sharecroppers were one of this phenomenon, and so Operation Burga was initiated. Operation Burga initiated giving the three important components. One is that no sharecropper can be evicted from their own land, number one, and they should be given 75% of the produce rather than 50% of the produce. So they are given 75% of the produce. And third important component is that they will get the inheritance right on the same piece of land where they are cultivating, and they will get the institutional support for the cultivation of that land. So in that way, it ensured a security of the tenant in the agrarian setup. And that brought a phenomenal change in the agrarian relationship in rural Bengal. But what happened, as I told, as the landman ratio has increased, has declined in Bengal, that is, it has declined to the extent of 0.17 hectare per household, means now in Bengal, I mean, if you look into in terms of individual land ownership, it has declined to the extent of only 0.07 hectare per person, and that small bigger amount of land is unable to give livelihood security to these people. So land distribution has been fine. I mean, it has been able to do that, but that has not been able to ensure the livelihood security to vast segment of the population. So what are the things to be done? I mean, thing has happened at this space. We find that, yes, land has been able to give them an amount of security, but employment security has not been generated. That's why there's been large-scale migration of the workforce from Bengal, from agriculture to non-agricultural sector. It is more than 47% of the rural workforce now work in the non-agricultural sector. And migration from the Bengal, from those agricultural family, from that part, now it is going to very many parts of the country. So though land reform has been successful, but it has not been able to ensure those livelihood security, because the scope of alternatives avenue of employment, those has not been ensured in the society. So those are some of the phenomenon to be looked into, that both in terms of success of land reform on the one hand, and ensuring livelihood security on the other. And that is perhaps one of the things need to be done by the state and the other stakeholders of the society, how that livelihood security can be ensured for the largest segment of the society.
Thank you so much, sir, for taking time out and talking to us today on some of the very critical themes and issues concerning social movements, peasants in India. And again, I would suggest to our viewers to go back. You've referred to a number of books that you've written here, on these themes and subjects. I would suggest them to go back and read them. And thank you once again from the entire Doing Sociology team for speaking to us today.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be with you, and thank you.